When I was 18, I was thinking, okay, so I have three choices. Either I will be a movie star, which is exactly what I would like to be, or an attorney, or a journalist. So one family member, my dad was a journalist, my uncle was a lawyer, and nobody is a movie star.
Hey, everybody, we are live at another episode of the I Just Want This Done Divorce Podcast with our special guest, Diana Romanov. Thank you for joining us today, Diana. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So Diana and I met online because I came across her book, Divorce Like a Boss, and it's really excellent. I've obviously written a book about divorce, but I am interested in other divorce lawyers' takes because I think it's good to have other perspectives. And I found we had a lot of things in common with the way we practice law and the way we think about these cases. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I was born and raised in Ukraine, changed a couple countries, Israel, Germany, and now the US. Passed the bar in Germany, became a fully licensed attorney, and 5 days later, I was on the plane to California to take another bar. I was telling myself, I don't want to be a 9-to-5 lawyer, and here I am.
We could have been movie stars and not spent all this time working.
Speaking of movie stars, when I was 18, I was thinking, okay, so I have three choices. Either I will be a movie star, which is exactly what I would like to be, or an attorney or a journalist. So one family member, my dad was a journalist, my uncle was a lawyer, and nobody is a movie star. And then I thought, okay, when I'm 60, it's like red wine. The older I get, the more exclusive and tastier and wiser I will be. So I will be a lawyer so I can be an actor in court and I can still write, and I can be a journalist when I write my papers. So I picked the lawyer part.
That's great. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, but my eyes were no good. So there's no flying in my future. So it was decided to go to law school instead.
One friend of mine, Bernie, he said, when I was deciding becoming a lawyer or a pilot, I realized that one mistake as a pilot would be deadly. As a lawyer, not so much.
That's true. That's a good point.
It's a great point.
You've got a YouTube channel that's blowing up. How can people find your channel, and tell us about the content you're putting out there?
Well, I decided to have a catchy tag, divorce like a boss. It means be in charge of your own divorce, be in the driver's seat of your own destiny. That's the name of the channel. So if you type in Google divorce like a boss, you will see Amazon link to buy the book in 4 versions, and as well as YouTube channel. To answer the second part of your question, what is the content of this YouTube channel? Well, after many, many years of practice, I realized some people can't afford to speak with an attorney at the rate. And there was pre-AI. It was 7 years ago when I started actively posting once a week. So I just posted videos about, let's say, ultimate guide for spousal support. Everything you need to know about spousal support for 17 minutes. So when someone books half an hour, they're not going to ask me questions about spousal support because they already watched the video. And it saves me time to not repeat the same material every single time.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're a big believer in client education. That's something that we've talked about before the show. And how do you find that helps with your work with your clients?
It is so much fun to speak to a client who is thinking like a lawyer, meaning they're putting their emotions aside. They're educated, so I don't have to spend 5 hours explaining to them every single step, which is why the book and the YouTube channel. And they're asking targeted questions, and we're strategizing almost at the same level. So the more educated the client is, the less fluff and less pre-work we need to do. They already know how retainer works. They already know how spousal support works, how things are divided. They're not asking me, what is the date of separation? Because they watched 5 videos about it.
I think a couple of things you've pointed out before is, and we've talked about before the show, was the idea of the cost of winning. And that's something about cost-benefit analysis. And we both were on the same page about that. Can you talk a little bit about that? And the way you put it was, what's the cost of winning? What do you mean by that, and how should clients think about that?
I have to go way back where I took the phrase from. So Superior Court judge in San Francisco, Judge Mahoney, retired and went to JAMS to work as a mediator. And I was representing a ballerina client who didn't have money, who had a 6-year-old daughter and a husband, Ukrainian mafia, I'm just exaggerating a little bit for the sake of entertainment, who then said, well, too bad. You signed a prenup where you waived everything, but the prenup didn't have disclosures, and it was presented to her a day before the wedding without translation, and she was living in Russia. So, the prenup was on its face not enforceable. And by the way, the business that I have, security business, was all these weapons. I sold it to my buddy in Ukraine, Igor. And I'm getting $50,000 a year, and I don't work. But I'll hire 5 lawyers to defend me, one in prenup, one in my business, one in custody. And so we were sitting in this room with Judge Mahoney, and me and my client and the judge, retired judge, and he says, what would you like to get? And we gave a number. And then he said, what would be the price of winning? Meaning, what would be the price of getting this number?
Right.
And at that point, I was already $80,000 in debt with my client because we agreed I'll get paid on deferred, meaning she could pay somewhat, but not the full amount that was incurred, because we had to hire a private investigator, finding hidden bank accounts with lots of money that we tried to freeze. We had orders of attorney's fees that he didn't pay that went to contempt. And so all of that incurred fees. And so we realized it will cost a lot of money to win. So Judge Mahoney offered a whole day at GEMS to mediate this case. And then we went to GEMS. In our room, three people. In their room, 7 people, claiming there's no money.
How do they pay the lawyers and everything? That's a good question.
And then at 6 p.m., after we couldn't settle, I was looking at Judge Mahoney, and my favorite phrase, Judge, what do you think would be outside of the box solution here, since inside the box of law doesn't work? He said, well, you know what? I noticed that lawyer, that Russian lawyer, you need to talk to her. She has control over her client. She's the one you can settle. So I texted her a day before the contempt hearing. This is our number, final number. And she said, okay. And that's how we settled, via text.
So you sometimes just go sort of take a big picture analysis and cut through all the noise and say, look, come up with your bottom line and give it a try. And like you said, what's the cost of winning? And if you thought, this guy will fight us forever, if she has some kind of reasonable number, maybe he'll go for it. And it sounds like it worked out. I think that's an excellent thing, is to think about the costs people don't consider as the time and agony, the mental strain, the opportunity cost. What else could I be doing if I was divorced already? It's beyond the legal fees. There's so many other costs. And that's what you were explaining to your client, which I think is, and Judge Mahoney. For those of you who don't know, JAMS, JAMS, is a place that facilitates mediations, and they provide the facilities for that, and they have a system for that. So mediators will work through a company known as JAMS. And there are other ones too. One's called End Dispute, and there's the American Arbitration Association. These host these kind of things. Another good thing was, and you talk about this in the book, we'll talk about the importance of the client addressing their own problems, because I think that's the common notion is that we're going to fix the problem as divorce lawyers, and the client can just hire us, and then, it's like plug and play, So what do you think? What's your response to that? And I thought you explained that really well when we talked about that before. Talk a little bit about that.
I feel like there are 2 types of clients. The first type is, okay, here's doctor, my body, do what you think is necessary, and I'm going to be asleep. And then the lawyer is filling out the forms, getting out information, has to pull information, and the client doesn't respond. And there are the second type of clients who are super in control. I know everything. This is how you need to do your job, and this is what the strategy is. And then there is this one in the middle, and that's the ideal client. A client a bit with open mind, providing necessary information, open to strategy, to discuss the price of winning, to discuss the lost opportunity. If you're making $2 million and you end up being in trial for 15 straight days, you might lose your job. And maybe that winning $500,000 after all wasn't worth it. But you got your ex, and then there is this resentful client, the client who is, I will pay any price just to show them that I'm right. That's the extreme. So somewhere in the middle is the ideal.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. What about there's a tendency to want to hand it over to the lawyer, like you said. And one of the things we've talked about before on the show and in social media for our firm is what I call the 90-10 rule or concept, which is 90% of the client's problems can't be solved by us as divorce lawyers. I mean, you call it whatever percentage you want, but I like to call it 90-10. The 10% is the legal stuff that we can fix or attack. And 90% of the things are emotional issues and challenges with children and the soon to be ex and all those things that are going on that we can't deal with. And you've mentioned something about before, you've talked about the client being the hero of the story and the lawyer not being able to do it alone. I thought that was well said. One thing I wanted to know was, you've said before that there's a myth about divorce lawyers that we have no heart, sort of the shark divorce lawyer. What do you say about that? Because I thought that was really interesting.
It's a fine balance. If a lawyer has too much of a heart, that lawyer risks to enmesh with the client's feelings, and it leads to unnecessary litigation. Let's say if someone was wronged, meaning someone got hurt, and the lawyer is enmeshing with the client that this is so unjust and we are going to show them, then the risk is to forget about price of winning, to forget about how much it's going to drain the client emotionally to go for showing them. Sometimes I have clients, I just want the judge to know. I just want that everyone sees compassionately. Yes, I hear you, but judge has 30 cases a day sometimes. And yes, the judge will hear you, but the judge is a stranger in a robe. It's not some wizard who is going to solve your problems and have compassion. So if you would like to have compassion and someone dedicating time to your problems, hire a mediator, a private mediator who gets $700 per hour to listen to how you have been wronged. You can tell me that, but I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. So it would be best if we would separate the emotional part of this to a business part of this. And it might sound corporate, and I used to be on the other side sitting and listening to clients for hours, and then I had to go and for a walk and I couldn't work half of the day. And now I feel like I am a surgeon. I'm going to this operation room. I don't faint when I see blood. I don't feel set back when I hear a very horrible story. I just see it from a perspective, okay, so what? Now what? What are we going to do about this using the most logical way to resolve a problem? If the problem is emotional, this is not a place to resolve it.
Really well said. We talk about maintaining objectivity, and your analogy for the medical analogy, I think, is great. And I've said similar things before about the importance of maintaining objectivity, and that we can't afford to wear our clients' problems. Like you said, it'll destroy you emotionally as a lawyer. You can't possibly take on all that emotion without it affecting you. And so maintaining objectivity, like a doctor, is critical, I think, for a divorce lawyer to do a good job and to not get sucked down a drain of endless litigation and recrimination. That's a really good point. So Rahul, why don't you talk about there's some other good points here, I think.
Yeah. Before that, I was going to just ask a follow-up, meaning how do you have these clients who've watched your videos and who've been educated by what you say, but then they've also been further either re-educated or otherwise they've gone into ChatGPT or Claude or name your AI Gemini, and then they say, well, I know your video said this, but this sounds more convincing, and they start challenging your concepts when you're already pretty far afield in the case. And so how do you deal? What are your strategies of dealing with something like that?
The best way to deal with these type of clients is to ask them what prompt they gave to AI, because usually the prompt they're putting is one-sided. Well, give me the arguments why I'm right. Instead of, if you were a judge and you were a top-notch judge in California practicing family law, objectively looking at the situation, how would you decide if this is the set of facts on one side and set of facts on the other side? And then I find out that, of course, the prompt I gave was one-sided.
All AI is now is the buddy. I'm old enough to have been doing this since, 25 years ago. Yeah, 25 years ago, it was like my buddy told me that he didn't have to pay maintenance, Why do I have to pay alimony? My buddy doesn't pay any alimony. Doesn't mention that the buddy's in another state. The buddy got divorced 10 years ago. The buddy has a prenup saying there's no maintenance or whatever. Fill in the blanks. But like you said, that's the prompt. And the facts are different, completely different. The law is different, whatever. And they just remember their buddy told them whatever. And that was always sort of our competition was my buddy, JD, who's not a lawyer. Or the other thing was Google, 2-3 years ago, they were Googling it and saying that wasn't the case. And now it's just a sort of a new amped up version of that.
Right. It's almost like garbage in, garbage out, essentially, is what you get.
Yeah, I feel like the wrong way to react would be, well, AI, you shouldn't be using AI. Because we know everyone is going to use AI. And I'm a lawyer here, and I just don't do that.
That's interesting. So I was going to say, one of the points I think that Rafe and I also share is very important is the charging for consults. You're charging for your initial consult. We are firm believers in that unless it's, unless it's like a special case where someone is highly referred to us and they sought us out or whatever. But more likely than not, we believe strongly in charging for consults. Did you want to elaborate on why that's a good idea?
I used to not charge for a very short amount of time, and I felt so used because A, clients would not show up. They didn't pay for it. There is no cancellation policy. So I get all dressed up, come to my office, and then the client doesn't have the dignity even to cancel timely. So that was one reason. The second reason, when I'm not charging, they don't feel the value. They're not even listening. It's like, it's like window shopping. Next. When they spend money, they feel the investment. Paid so much, I got to listen. I'm going to write it down. Can you record the video? Can you send me the notes? And I spent 20 years educating myself in different states, different countries, California and Germany. I don't want to have that feeling that my time is not appreciated. It's chipping off my confidence. I do have exceptions. When someone is referring a client from another attorney, sometimes that's where I don't charge. When I have a client who, after the consultation, I realize this is a really bad case for me to take, I say, no hurt feelings. I don't feel that this is a good fit, but I will refund you for the consultation.
Yeah, we do the same. That makes a lot of sense. I think you made a point in your book about this. One of the things you said was, buy a full hour of the attorney's time, because what they don't tell you when they schedule a free consultation is it's 10 minutes with a paralegal, or it's 5 or 10 minutes talking to the lawyer, just screening you. There's not a real consultation. It's just the attorney screening to see if the person's a good fit. And they're not getting any real value. And it's the whole story about getting what you pay for, like you said. So it's part of it is taking it seriously and those all the things you mentioned. But the other thing I thought you said in the book was very good, was getting full value and taking a full hour to really get some valuable information about your case and really get to know the lawyer you might hire. I mean, when the plumber comes out, you pay them for the visit, even if they don't end up doing much, or the heating contractor has a minimum charge just to come to the house. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that an attorney that's any good is going to charge something for a consultation.
Flat fee, another topic. Why flat fee doesn't work in family law cases. Also, I've done that, been there, not a good idea.
Talk about that a little bit.
So flat fee works only when it's very, very clear what the product is going to be. Okay, I will prepare the prenup and that will cost X. But the problem is it never works that way. When someone calls, they usually say the following: my divorce is very simple. We agree on everything. It shouldn't cost very much. I just need help preparing the forms and the agreement. And I fell for it in the past. I'm like, sure, sounds like a great idea. So here's the flat fee amount. And then next thing I know, the other side is not agreeing with some terms. It's hard to reach them. The disclosures they're doing are so incorrect that I have to do all the work, following up, seeking certain documents to make sure that each piece of divorce, and then it ends up being 3 times as much as the client was saying. So whenever a client is saying, oh, my case is so simple, someone called me a month before a 6-day trial after she had 5 lawyers on limited scope. And she said, this is a move away trial. It's pretty simple. Once you read it, you will understand this is pretty simple. So first red flag, clients don't say to lawyers. It's pretty simple. It's up to the lawyer to decide whether the case is simple. And usually the case unfolds. It's like hiring someone on the first day. They're so great, but when they start working, you realize, oops, that's not what I expected. So that's similar to what happens in divorce cases. And 99% of the time, 99, almost every time, it's never that simple. There's always something.
Yeah, and it's so hard to know in a 1-hour consultation whether you're dealing with a more complex matter or not. So it's virtually impossible to quote somebody a fixed fee based on talking to them for 45 minutes. And like you said, it's not even that they're lying. It's that they don't even know the things to tell you about necessarily. Or they don't know the complexities that may come down the road, or that their spouse might change their mind, or what have you. And, they think it's agreed and they don't know what they're going to run into. So it's too early to tell.
And then you learn later, you learn later that the other side is actually very attached to certain belongings that on the scale of importance would be in attorney's mind very low. But for them, you spend hours negotiating where the couch should go.
You don't quite know what somebody's big issue is until you dig into a case, or multiple issues. And that can be a problem, whether it's the spouse assumes that they're going to be okay with selling the house, or that they want to take the house. And they find out they don't, and get all these areas of disagreement that are unexpected. And the amount of variables multiply during the cases. So tell us about, there's a couple of things you mentioned I thought that were great in your book, and they were surprises. You were cautioning potential clients in the book about surprises they'll run into in the divorce process. And I thought a couple of them were really well stated out of the, I think, 4. One was, we have to do all the work, meaning the lawyer has to do all the work. And another one you made a point of was, you're better off doing it privately, which I don't think a lot of people realize. Let's first talk about we have to do all the work. And we addressed some of it before, or you addressed some of it earlier, but this sort of the idea that it will be a process where they don't need to be involved. Can you tell us a couple examples, or one example about a case where a client wasn't participating and it made a difference, or they did participate and it made a big difference?
I just finished one case where a client was participating and it made a huge difference. A client was falsely accused of domestic violence over 25 years of marriage. There were 25 allegations of financial abuse, sexual abuse, coercive control, physical abuse, you name it. Everything on earth he was accused of. After 11 days of trial, we got an order saying, well, there's some abuse in terms of you yelled too much, but that's it. No financial abuse, no stay away, no more, no contact. And the reason for that is because the client was very educated about how to attack credibility and how to gather evidence to contradict. For example, if the other side says, I have been financially abused, but they're the one hiding all accounts. They're the one who deposited their stocks that they never told about secretly in that account. And the rest was joint. And there was no time where the client said, you shouldn't be using this money. That's pretty good to know, right? Same for if someone says someone sexually abused me, raped me, but then the client provides text messages right after alleged event where wife says, and by the way, you need to write this letter to INS. Love you very much. We had super nice time. If I didn't have that text message, it just... So that's a couple examples when a client cooperates, how well it can benefit the client, because I don't have the facts. If I have one allegation on this date, all I need is surrounding circumstances, witnesses who might have seen it, depose the witnesses, text messages, emails, surrounding circumstances. All of these things I explain to the client I need in order to rebut this fact. Or if wife says he shouldn't be with the child because he's an alcoholic and drug addict, the court cannot order follicle test. I tell the client, we can eliminate this if you voluntarily take follicle test. And if the client does that and shows 3 months when she says he was coming home on whatever drug, then it just disproves her claim, makes her look not credible. Another case where a client was not cooperating. A client just decided that he doesn't want to get divorced. So wife filed for spousal support, attorney's fees, and he didn't show up. It went to default. And the problem with the default is that they used tax returns for spousal support. The award was enormous, $300,000 a month. The problem with that award that it included carry interest from separate property, meaning post date of separation earnings combined with some community property. So the wife was double dipping into all of these assets. And then for 8 years, that client didn't do anything, didn't hire an accountant while wife spent millions of dollars accounting to realize, oops, I got $20 million more. Yay, I'm not going to produce my accounting to him because he's never going to spend $1.5 million doing accounting in these 8 years. So that's where it hurt so much, where when the client contacted me and I said, I'm not going to take your case unless you agree to do accounting. But I realized that accounting of that extent is going to be really tough to do. So he had to sort of work with what we had, limited accounting, orders that you cannot claw back as much. And so eventually we chose private mediation and settled this case. But I think this is such an extraordinary example, a very extreme example of how non-action can be so costly.
That makes a lot of sense. So Rahul, you were going to ask about like the assembling a team, I think, which is a great point.
That's exactly right. So one of the key points you make, which I think everybody who's going through this process needs to hear about, is experts. Why should you hire them? And more importantly, why can you, I guess it's a double negative, why can't you not afford to hire them?
Well, I would like to say I picked being a lawyer for many reasons. I went to university to study economics, and I realized, gosh, that's not my strength. And so I see lawyers doing Nelson calculations, division of assets. Sometimes we even have these softwares, division of assets softwares. And I also remember one lawyer told me she did her own Nelson calculation and a client sued her for $800,000 because she used not Nelson, she used another formula that benefited the client, but eventually didn't work out. So the problem, if I am specialized in brain surgery, I'm not going to operate on something else. So my specialty is being a lawyer, not an accountant. So an accountant can do it seamlessly. So they just get all the bank statements. They have the right softwares. They create reports, assets and debts, marital standard of living, Nelson calculation in no time. I think that's the right approach, to hire people who know what they're doing.
Absolutely. And it's sort of like this misconception where some clients who might not be educated in this process might think, well, why can't you do it yourself? That's why I hired you. I hired you to be my lawyer, and they think that means for everything, right? And so it's important to sort of educate them into saying, no, you need an accountant who can do this more precisely, more effectively, more efficiently for a fraction of the time than it would take me, which I might also get it wrong. And because it's not my area of expertise, I'm not going to file your taxes for you because I'm not a tax accountant.
Yeah, and sometimes clients say, oh, my case is so simple. Why do we need, I only have these accounts. And then you learn they have stock options a little bit here and there, and they have retirement accounts where we still need Quadro. And I also suggest to hire a separate company for division of Quadros, separate company for accounting, therapist, and a lawyer.
And that team includes, like you mentioned, therapist, you mentioned a CPA, a state attorney to modify a state plan, your wills and trusts is great. I think also you mentioned co-parenting counselor or parenting counselor, which can be tremendously helpful with communicating and learning how to navigate that situation. So there's a whole section in Diana's book that covers all of those experts and all laid out there. And we don't always think about those people. And like you said, unfortunately, clients think of them as an expense item when they can be a huge asset. Especially
co-parenting counselor. If two lawyers who are not educated to talk about children in their psychology and how divorce is going to affect, they're going to exchange emails based on what each client tells them to do. A co-parenting counselor will get to the bottom of it and find out what is the emotional underneath the emotional resentment or whatever is going on, how to navigate to get to what's really best for the child, for their child. So I find it not so helpful when attorneys are talking about schedule, especially in high conflict cases, DV cases.
Right. And we don't have the professional training to understand, like you said, the DV aspects or what's best for a child of a certain age or mental capacity. And the folks with that training have years of training in that type of thing and are much better equipped to work with the clients on that. And by the way, at probably a lower hourly rate. And so it's like when you talked about the emotional aspect and having a counselor, one of the things years ago, I'd get into these long conversations where the client would dump all of their feelings in a call. And that's, some of that's okay. And some of that's necessary where they need to unwind on some things. But when it would get into an issue that's really about communication or emotion, and they'd ask me for my advice, I would say, well, I'll tell you some common sense thing my dad used to tell me, like, ignore it, let it roll off your back, but you're paying me my hourly rate to tell you things that, are going to sound like common sense. And I'm not trained in all of these things. And so you're better off getting those experts, like you said. I think I'd like to close on something that's at the close of your book. I thought it was great. You have the 10 commandments of divorcing like a boss at the end of the book. I'm not going to play a memorizing game with you and ask you to challenge you to recite all 10.
Please don't, because I wouldn't remember. Last time I looked at my book was a couple of years ago.
You don't have the whole book memorized? Come on. Okay. But you have some great points here. So the first one got my attention. It's commandment 1, protect your troops. Explain that.
Attorney's well-being is important. In 2023, I decided to not take diagnosed mentally unstable clients because I realized, let's say the client is 10% of my client's pool, but they take 90% of my energy. At some point, I had a burnout with these type of clients where one client demanded that I talk to that client every week for 2 hours. And I thought at first that would be fine because I got into the case after a couple of attorneys, another red flag not to do. But I thought I am a hero. I can do this. I can help her. And usually I can, but the price I pay is not worth it. So, and I was on that call every week, and all I heard every time, my husband is a narcissistic, chauvinistic, and stick. And then I was listening, and it was really a mental challenge to shift from, well, actually, you're living in the house that eats up, Epstein, it eats up your portion of community property share because the spousal support is lower than the carrying cost of the home. You need to get out of this home. You're living in a big house by yourself. And so that was my main goal. And after, I think about 2 months of 2 hours every week, I remember standing up, it was in Zoom, and I said, I cannot do this anymore. Let me walk out because I'm going to say something I will regret. Let me get some breather. So I walked out, and I just realized there is no way I could get through to this client. There is no way this client is going to listen to me. I think when I looked at her case, there was a guardianship by her ex over her because she wouldn't listen to anything, no quarter or nothing. And then, of course, she blamed me later for not explaining. And thankfully, what I do, I record every meeting. So when clients come back and say, well, I hired you for this, but in reality, we have 3 recorded meetings, including the initial meeting, explaining everything, especially for prenups. Gosh, in prenups, I sent 20 pages called Cover My Ass letter. But I call it Memorandum of Understanding. And then I explain, I advise you not to sign this agreement because it's very one-sided, but you chose not to listen and you chose not to agree to these 5 items.
That's great. I think a couple of the commandments you mentioned one was, keep your kids number one, like focus on your children. I thought that was great. And then one thing I think is you said really well was she is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new chapter. And you said, embrace the new you. I have a story about that comes to mind as a client came into me. She looked terrible when she came into me for the consultation. And she was very depressed about the divorce. And she got a counselor on my recommendation. And she started taking care of herself, went to the gym, lost weight, went to college, took a couple courses, got a job. She was a stay-at-home mom. And she had a complete transformation in the 1 year that I represented her. And she looked amazing on the day that she got divorced. And she was happy and she regained strength. And I think she focused on embracing the new you. Do you experience that a lot of people tend to marinate in the sorrows? You know, there are people that just want to stick in neutral. What do you say about that? Obviously, this is from your experience, you know, so, and you've been divorced also. Can you talk a little bit about that? I thought this was really important. And I don't think there's enough focus on the future. It's all about solving today's problem, and people get mired in the today.
I remember when I got divorced, I was married for about 7 years. And when I got divorced, I remember for 6 years, I was ruminating the past. And my denial phase was so long, so painful. And when I see clients do that, it's hurtful to see. And the more the client and I at that time would have accepted, the less the phases of grief would have been much easier to go through. And I like what someone said, a 109-year-old man said, "Past is the history, future is the mystery. Stay in the moment." Happiness is a choice, and it's easier said than done. But being in the moment, I cannot change the past. I don't know what the future will bring. And all I can do is to control myself as much as I can in the moment, how I respond to things. Divorce itself is neutral. It's the relationship to it that makes it painful. The story around it, I'm a failure, or this shouldn't be happening to me, or he or she shouldn't be doing this to me. The more acceptance around the neurons regarding this event, the event is neutral, but the beliefs, the belief system, and a lot of clients I had were in arranged marriages, and they thought they have to stay married for a long time. So all these beliefs are creating this painful narrative that causes suffering.
That's great. I think you said it really well. And I think if people have that positive focus on the future, on the mystery a little bit, and act present now, you dwelling on the past doesn't have much value. There's a certain value in learning what went wrong, learn from mistakes when mistakes are made and try to improve for the future. But beyond that, dwelling on a loss is just wasted energy. I agree with you 100%. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I want to make sure everybody knows Divorced Like a Boss, Diana Romanov, available on Amazon and also Kindle, right? Is there an audiobook?
Kindle, audiobook, hard copy, soft copy, for all desires.
All the formats. And then tell us also so Divorced Like a Boss is the way people can find you on YouTube, right?
Correct.
What is your website for your law firm?
RomanovLaw.com with
okay,
V.
We'll have all this in the show notes, all the links to your social, law firm, all that we'll make sure to have in the show notes for everyone, folks. And anything else you'd like to add about content or how people can contact you?
On my website, the easiest way is to schedule an appointment online. I have a calendar. People can just book it online. That's the best way because usually I'm on the phone.
You represent divorce clients in the San Francisco area, correct?
In the Bay Area, California, yes.
Excellent. If anyone's in the Bay Area in California, please reach out to Diana. She's outstanding, and we love her content. Thank you a lot. Thank you very much for being on the show. We appreciate it. And everyone have a great day out there.